Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to have you here. And today I have such an amazing guest. She's one of my favorite people in the world. And I also one of my favorite people to discuss feminism with. She's my friend and my very, very dear sister, Sam. Thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you for having me back. I love coming on chatting with you. It's great. And I love our little side chats too.
Right. We're always like, oh my God, I just heard this. What do you think about about this situation? And we have such amazing, long, profound conversations about the world in general and the feminism, women, and everything around everything related to empowerment and liberation.
I'll tell you, actually, oh my God. So because you get my voicemails, like I get so caught up in our conversation. It's like the world around me disappears and I'm just like, ah. And yesterday when we were like sending messages back and forth, we finally had so I live in New England, I'm in Rhode Island. And so for those of you who know, it's cold here. But yesterday it was like in the 60s, so it was balmy. So I was out on the front porch and you and I were in the middle of discussing everything we were discussing. And like, I just moved to my house. I'm sitting on my deck and I'm just like yelling into the phone about patriarchy and misogyny. And then I like realize all of my neighbors heard me. Like I'm brand new to the house, neighborhood, and I'm just out here screaming about dicks. And I was like, well, now everyone knows where I'm at. And I was like,
I love that. I love that so much. That's amazing. The good thing is that those that are of a similar kind of view, they will approach you, and those that are not, they will just take a step back because they already saw how passionate you are.
Exactly.
That's amazing. That's so amazing. And today we wanted to discuss a topic that it's pretty important and serious for women in general, and then specifically for women that work in anything sexual. Either it's sexual education, sexual coaching, or who are sex workers in the more traditional interpretation of the word. And it's sexual harassment. So I think that is so important because the coaching industry has this tendency of trying to justify men and trying to understand them. Oh my God, his intentions were kind. You should just look beyond him. Why were you triggered by him? Like we are so used to protecting men and to justifying men that we put ourselves down like carpets and we stop speaking about the very important issue that is our safety.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and the thing is too, and I like keep coming back to this myself, you can justify anything in the world. Like if you really, really, really want to get abstract, right? Like you can justify any in the world, like, oh, well, it's because this happened to this person. Oh, it's because they come from this place. Oh, it's because da da da. Like really, if you want to ignore something inappropriate, malicious, dangerous, like if you want to not deal with that, you can find a way to justify it. And so like, and if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do, right? And you can find a reason to justify why that's what you want to do. But like what I say to myself and other people at the end of the day is, what do you stand for? Anything can be justified. What do you stand for? Yeah. Like what are your boundaries? This is your life. What do you need? Because anything could be excused, but you're not anything and you're not anyone. So what do you need? And that's okay. I'm like, yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
And I love it. I think it's so important. I think that in the desire to see beyond whatever reason people are having to do the stuff that they do and to be understanding and to be a force of good healing, and we end up whitewashing something that it's so harmful and no wonder that men can keep doing that in our industries, because they feel that they are justified to do that. They do that everywhere in any industry. Like a woman, just for being a woman, or a woman identifying, knows what it's like to be harassed at some point. But then if a woman exists on the internet, you know that she knows what it's like to be harassed at some point in her life. But if a woman does anything related to sexuality, gosh, the harassment becomes a nightmare, a nightmare, specifically and that's a whole point that I would love to take in another like during the conversation later on, which is specifically for women of color and women that seem particularly vulnerable. There is a lot of sexual harassment there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like I believe that, like, you know, living in rape culture, living in cultures where misogyny is still alive and well. You know, despite living in the Me Too era, misogyny is alive and well. You know, we are still living in a place, we have not shifted our paradigm yet. We are still living in a place where you put a woman and sexuality together in any context, and it's seen as an invitation, because women are still believed to be subservient to men. We're here to hold up men. We're here to serve men. We're here to, you know, just we're here for them. Therefore, like, are our bodies being seen? Is sexuality involved? Like, oh, surely that's not for me. Like, it's of course that's for you. It's an invitation, right? And so it's like there's just so much to work through with that. So yeah, I'm not surprised, like, you know, that coaches, especially who deal with anything with sexuality, would of course get that, because it's like, oh, this is for me, you know. Like, I know you read it, and I think this is like really good for anyone watching this or listening to read Kate Manne. She's one of my absolute favorite contemporary philosophers. The first book that we read was Down Girl.
Yeah.
Entitlement is her follow-up. Down Girl is a little more like heavy, it's a little more academic, and Entitlement is good for, I think, like anybody. It's a lot more accessible, but it really goes into like how deep and twisted and layered this entitlement goes. Once you see it, you're like, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. I love that book. I read it because you recommended it to me, and that really shifted so many things. I realized how deep entitlement goes that you don't even notice how you are actually part of the whole. You as a woman are part of the whole situation. And that takes me to the next question, or to the next issue, is that what harassment is. That is something that I have been coming back to you, and you could open my eyes in that aspect, because I would just try to express it to fellow coaches.
Mhm.
And some of them would justify men and go like, yeah, well, this doesn't happen to me. What are you doing to trigger this reaction? What are you doing with your marketing? It's weird because this has never happened to me. That was one reaction. And the other was just like, yeah, just ignore them. So they were normalizing this, or totally denying my reality. And then when I would come to you, you allowed me to notice that it was actually harassment. So I would like to use this space to speak about what we are describing as harassment.
Mhm.
Because I am sure that so many people are going like, yeah, well, this has never happened to me either, or I am not a harasser. I am not the kind of man that does that. I am a good man. So let's speak about it. I personally would describe harassment, or the harassment that I have received, as, of course, dick pics or masturbation videos, but also about forcing my time to fit theirs. Like, keeping pushing and pushing and pushing until they get the answers and the kind of sexual conversation, sexual involvement that they are looking for. Asking questions that are not real questions, but are just meant to have a sexual conversation with me. Is masturbation good? I mean, people that are actually wondering about if masturbation is good or not don't ask you like that. Is it okay if my sperm is this thick or the other? You know, like they just keep going, and you tell them, I am busy. Look, fella, I am working, and they keep pushing and pushing. But I have another question. I just need another question. They don't respect my boundaries. Guys that book my discovery call or free call in order to masturbate secretly, like they turn off their cameras and they are masturbating as they are having sexual conversations with an expert, like, oh, tell me, is it okay if women masturbate? And then they start getting pushier and pushier, but tell me more, at what time are you masturbating? Or guys that pretend to be good guys and are just like, oh my god, I would never do this to you, but please tell me more. I posted recently asking women to write a word or a GIF that would describe their relationship with their pussy, because that's what my business is about, getting women to know and love their bodies, and particularly their vaginas and their vulvas. And I got a guy that had been a good guy in quotations for a long time, and he wrote in that thread where women were writing very empowering messages about their connection to their bodies. And he replied with a GIF that was something like, ooh, ooh. It was like, wow, that is invasive, that is gross, that is making all of this beautiful, empowering conversation about your penis, about how delighted you are that women are speaking about their bodies. So that is what I describe as harassment. But I would love to know how would you describe it?
I mean,
if you have something to add.
Yeah, it varies, like, you know, depending on the individual to some degree, right? Like a lot of what you're describing, I personally would say is just like objectively harassment, right? But everyone has different boundaries. So it's hard to say. I think anything that, you know, involves coercion and non-consent is harassment, period. You know, and like what you're describing, right, is like these clients are into humiliation, right? Like they want to humiliate you because they know, and we talked about this yesterday, a lot of them know there are services where they could do this and that is welcome, right? There are online places, there are like webcam girls and like forums and all kinds of sex workers where they can do this. Like it is acceptable and it is invited. That is an industry, you know, like these workers make money off of that, and it's great and it's good and it's whatever. But they're intentionally not going where it's welcome because they're focused on the domination and the humiliation aspect of it, right? So it's like, this to me, again, and I'm going to keep saying this word a million bajillion times, but it is misogyny. It is punishment to a woman for trying to have an empowered sexuality outside of, you know, outside of like the male gaze, male focus, right? It is like, it is punishment for like, how dare you speak about this openly? How dare you speak about this in a way that doesn't center me? Like, how dare you be confident? Like, get back in your place. Your job is to be my slut. Your job is to be, you know, whatever, which being a slut is great if it's consensual, you know what I mean? Like, but it's like, it's right. The whole thing is it's not consensual, and it's not, you know, I hear so often like these justifications, like, well, they're curious. That's why they're showing up. Like they want to be close to this empowerment. No, they don't. No, they don't. No, because then they would be more vulnerable, right? Like it's a way to put women in their place for deviating from patriarchal ideas of what sexuality should be, how women are supposed to speak about sex. and they're trying to see, can I get a rise out of you? Can I humiliate the empowered woman? Because nothing gives a misogynist more power and pleasure than humiliating an empowered woman. It's just like, I took you down a notch. You know, like I know of I have a therapist who's very close to me, not my therapist, but someone very close to me as a therapist. And she does not specialize in sexuality at all. She's, you know, I can't say at all, but that's not one of her specialties. She's, you know, social. And she had one client who she's in her early 30s. This client was a middle-aged white businessman. And he started getting more and more graphic in their sessions about his sexuality and his sex life and things he wanted to do with his wife or what his wife wouldn't do with him, and just getting increasingly more graphic. And then when he'd see that you know, the therapist was uncomfortable, he would shame her or try to act like, you know, like just keep trying to push her boundaries and see, like, could I go further? Could I go further? And she told me about this. I was like, he's trying to humiliate you because you're a woman in power. That's what it is. He knows there's places he can go to get these services. He wants to knock you down. Yeah. So it's like, so I don't have compassion for that behavior. I absolutely do not. And I do not feel like we are going to fix this until we're saying that's inappropriate. Yeah. If you would like to do this, we can do this. If you cannot do that, then we're done. Ignoring it or just being like, well, they have good intentions. I'm sorry. A lot of these people don't have good intentions, and it is okay to acknowledge that, because that's how bad intentions stop and can evolve into something else. Yeah. But by giving it a pass, it's just saying this is okay.
Exactly. And it works against us. Like, it's not about how we can change their attitude, because they are not going to change it most likely. It's about how it makes us feel unsafe to show up.
Right. Because, well, and also, like, why do we have to hold it? Why? Because of what our bodies look like, we have to hold this bad behavior that perpetuates the stereotype that because I'm a woman, I'm nurturing, I'm your mom, I'm your caretaker. No, I'm going to put that shit back on you. You're a grown adult. You get to hold this. You get to hold that piece. You get to sit with why you do that. I don't need to hold that for you. Those are not my services. That's not what I offer. Like, you know, you came to my house. This is how we do things in my house. Like, if you want to do things the way you do in your house, you can go home.
Yeah, totally. I have so many examples about that, and I like to mention them because it's important that women that are going through something like that notice, like, oh my God, that is wrong. That is actually wrong, and it's okay to say it's wrong, and it's not normal that it happened to me. Because I think that the thing with patriarchal domination over women is that we normalize the abnormal, and we actually believe that it's normal and natural, and that it's on us, and that if we change enough, then they are going to behave differently. Surprise, they are not. And one example is precisely how one of these people that I mentioned earlier, I tried to charge him. I said, you're not going to get away with this as easy. You're going to pay me my full coaching session for taking my time and trying to get away with it, to masturbate on my, while I was actually thinking that I was doing a sales call. And one of the things that he said was, why could you charge me if you didn't even enjoy it? Wow. So the guy knew perfectly well that I was not enjoying it, that I was not part of his little game. And that's what he was getting off on. And that's why he thought that charging would be wrong, while he thought that he was able to keep going.
And you put it back on you. Like, that's a key factor, is why, like, you made this unpleasant, so why do I have to pay for it?
Yeah, exactly. And another example that comes to mind is a very famous YouTuber, Christina Kuzmik, who makes videos about motherhood and comedy. She's not about sexuality at all. She
Mhm.
speaks about motherhood and comedy and just being, positive. And then again, she received some messages that she decided to speak about and to reply openly. One of these messages was this guy saying, "Oh, I would like to, a specific and very raw description of what he wanted to do with her, right? Like, oh, I want you to blah blah blah." And she posted that, and she said, "No, you cannot do this."
Mhm.
And women started replying to her in anger, saying, "Why are you shaming that? You should be more than that. You're going below by shaming him. Oh, he was just trying to flirt with you. Oh," and
Mhm.
I think that's exactly what happens in the coaching industry.
Mhm.
That's the very same thing that happens in the coaching industry. When you
Mhm.
speak about a man tricking you, like how many times I have received a video of a man saying, "Am I masturbating right?" and sending you the video of them masturbating.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and they go like, "Oh, but they are just trying to reconnect to the energy of their penis." And no, they're
No, they're
not.
not. They're plenty connected. They like
Yeah.
they're connected. They are online, plugged in, like high speed, like they're good.
Yeah, exactly. And this shaming on women that are actually responding uh, happens in all areas of life. Like, women shouldn't be angry when our boundaries are over, when they are crossed, because that is on us. That makes us look bad. We should be so understanding of them. And that is bullshit. That is deeply disempowering.
Well, and it's like, as women, we police each other constantly because not only are we dealing with the conditions of patriarchal structures, but right, so we're dealing with the outside, but then we're wrestling with, how am I complicit, or how am I wanting to get off this ride, right? So it's just like, what's my role in all of this while also navigating that? And so I think a few things happen, right? Like I don't know everyone's motive absolutely, but the most common things that happen, right? When like a woman is like, I have these boundaries, this is not okay, I'm calling this thing out, right? And women are like, no, you can't do that. I think one of the main things that happens is certain women have received a lot of rewards for playing into being good for the patriarchy, right? When a woman minds her place, she is rewarded, right?
Mhm.
So she doesn't want to lose her positioning within all the privileges she's received from patriarchy. So it's threatening, right? Like, don't tell on daddy, he's so good. Like he pays my bills and he buys me things and he, gives me all the attention and whatever. So that's one of the main things that happen. I think one of the other main things that happens is when a woman stands up for her boundaries and she's like, this is not okay, this thing happened to me, like I'm saying no. I think some women will feel instant shame because maybe they were in that situation and they didn't feel like they could say something, and they to reason their bad feelings away, or they just didn't feel safe, whatever it is. And so there's shame that comes up, there's jealousy that comes up. And rather than just saying, that's really inspiring, I was in that position, I didn't know what to say, and I felt really belittled, or I felt less than, I didn't feel like I had the strength. Instead, they'll just be like, shut it down.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to feel like I'm not a strong woman because I couldn't say no. So you can't say no either. Like, you can't be a strong woman because I don't feel strong, right? And like that's heartbreaking, And I feel like when we're in these places where a woman has her boundaries and people shut it down, this perpetuates this cycle of like women not feeling the strength to speak out because we're also not supporting each other behind the scenes. Like, I'm someone who sometimes I do speak out. Sometimes I do feel like, you know what, like we're good here. And then there are other times where I just go silent or I freeze, you know, and it's like, I don't speak up when I want to. And in those moments, I rely on my sisters and my friends to talk it out with and hold me up. And I rely on them to say, it's okay that you didn't say anything. Are you okay? What do you need? Like, that sucks. Even if their boundaries are different, there's for you, that was awful. I'm so sorry. Don't beat yourself up. It's not your fault, you know? So that's just kind of what I see. And of course, people have other like personal motives and stuff. And like, that's their thing. But those are the two main ones I see. It's either like personal shame or fear of losing their patriarchal rewards because they've played the game well.
That's huge. That is something that happens so much. That would also justify perfectly well why they are obsessed right now in the woke industry about these men being dominant and women. You know, like all these paradigms that keep reproducing patriarchy. But I love something specifically that you're mentioning, and it's how your friends support you, like how important it is to have this space, even if it's just to hold another woman and to say, you know what, that is wrong. Because I think that the heaviest part of this is carrying the shame of not being able to speak about it, because you know that you will be criticized by other women because they will say, oh, just ignore it, as if it was that simple, which sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not, because
sometimes they hit a set of buttons where you're just like, I can't stand up for myself. You know what I mean? You never know. And then the next day you can be like, go fuck yourself. It's like not consistent, you know?
And sometimes they actually find a way to fool even the most protective woman. Like they find ways around. That's the thing, that I have learned how to block guys instantly. But recently, these two guys that I am talking about found a way to just go through my defenses and to get a talk with me. So that's the thing, that they find ways, that they find these weak spots, and that's okay. Instead of shaming women for falling for this, we should be listening to them and holding them, because that can be very triggering.
Yeah, it can be super upsetting. And like one of the things, oh man, my brain just exploded in a different direction, in a bunch of different directions. One of the things we were talking about yesterday actually is like a woman setting her boundaries, right? Saying like, this is unacceptable to me. This made me upset. And then another person coming back and saying, what is it about this that triggers you, right? And trying to like sort all that out. And like my response to that is, what is it about my boundaries that are triggering to you? What is it about my boundaries that are so unsettling to you that you need to psychoanalyze me right now? Like, why just say, okay, cool. Or, okay, I'm so sorry, you know, like why? And like this kind of like leads me to my next point. I was thinking about this a lot, and I don't remember if I messaged you or not, if I was just thinking about it. How so often, especially in well, I think anywhere, maybe this comes up more in the coaching industry, I'm not sure, but places where we have this inclination to like talk people through a process. So often vulnerability is mistaken for uncertainty. I've noticed that if you don't just step up, and not always, but often, if you don't just step up and say, here's my boundary, I'm not taking this, like, period, right? Like if you're just like, I really don't feel good about how that happened, and I don't think I can do this anymore. Or like, I was so hurt by this thing, and it's making me reevaluate my this, that, the other thing, my business plan, et cetera, right? People will mistake that moment of vulnerability for uncertainty. Like, oh, you didn't stand up and like rip your shirt open to expose like the S on your chest and be like, I'm not taking this. You're just like tapping into your emotions and going through a process and being like, I'm all set. This is what this made me feel. And people are like, let's talk about it. Like, why can't we have vulnerable expressions of boundaries? Why do they have to be like, you know, I see this often myself where people will be like, I'm hurt and I'm all set with this. And people will like, well, let's have a conversation. No, we don't have to have a conversation. Boundary, but I said it softly. Like, why is that not acceptable? So I don't know if that's something you notice also.
Totally. And I think it is so interesting because, yeah, this idea that we have to set our boundaries from this place of fearlessness and being always in our fire cuts through the very important process of questioning. Questioning if my reaction was coming from I don't know, from a deeper space, but questioning from a place of just holding, not from trying to fix something, but holding the things that come deeper, that come beyond, and that you start finding, and that can lead you to an even more powerful boundary eventually.
Right, exactly. Like being like, I'm starting with this boundary here, and I'm gonna so anything beyond here is like, that's a no. And then I'm gonna be in a process about the rest of this, right? And like people think that being in process for all of this means, well, maybe you're not sure about pushing out all of this. No, we're starting here. Like, oh, and I'll get back to you about this, but that is absolutely no.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you told me something beautiful that in one of our calls, that was our capacity to get more information and to change our minds. And I think that also applies to boundary setting, because things that we were okay with some time ago, it's fine if we are not okay with right now.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, like, right, something like I talk to my friends about often is like, for me, when there's an isolated incident with something, I'm generally inclined to let it go. Like I don't know if I'm a sucker or a patient person, or maybe like a combination of both. But if it's a one-off, I'll usually be like, that sucked, but I'll let it go. Because I'm like, everyone has their day, everyone has flaws, like whatever. If I see that something becomes a pattern, then I'm like, this is unacceptable. And sometimes that gets confusing for the perpetrator, right? Because the perpetrator is like, well, you weren't mad the first time. Like it was okay the first time or the second time, and I'm like, right, well, now it's happening constantly. So this is a different issue. Like you said, I've gathered more information. I have changed my mind,
Thank you. Yes.
It's like, okay, if you borrow my car and you accidentally hit the sidewalk, or you hit another parked car, I'm going to be like, fuck, but accidents happen. But if every time you borrow my car, you get into an accident, like you're done. Yeah. That's how I feel about like a lot of these boundaries, especially when it comes to sexuality, like.
Totally. I can see that in conversations. Like they might start asking questions, and they might think that I am being accepting of their insinuations because I let them pass. Like, oh, he called me beautiful, and I know that when a man calls me beautiful, it goes in the specific, like in that specific term.
Right.
In that
specific, let's see what happens.
Exactly. Like, yeah. Well, maybe he was actually being kind. Well, let's give it a chance. Oh my gosh, he keeps pushing. Well, maybe, you start giving it a little bit more entrance, because you just want to see if that is actually a boundary, or if it was a one thing, or if I am overreacting, and just like, okay, let's see. And then when they just go full harassy, I assume that they even get confused because I blocked all of a sudden. But the reality is that I let the first parts pass because I was trying to gather more information. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. Sorry, we have a special guest. But yeah, right? Like you're like, we all slip up, like my world and my vernacular is like one kind of way, and like people are coming from different places. So it's important to be patient where we can, not condemn everyone at like the first slip up. But then yes, once you gather more information, you're like, oh, this wasn't just an awkward mistake. This is you're trying to pull something with me, or you don't see me, or you don't respect me. Like, you know.
And then something that you just mentioned and that it's so important is that there are spaces where that attitude is welcome. There are forums, there are services that offer that. But yet again, the thing is, sexual workers also get harassed.
Absolutely.
Because the idea is to go beyond their boundaries. The idea is to trick them. The idea is to get things for free, even when they know they have to pay them. The idea is to humiliate the woman in there. So I think that the only reason why they try to do that to women outside of those specific spaces is that they are more we say in Spanish, tienen más colmillo. They have more experience, so they can detect that easier or faster. But they try to fool these women as well, and that is really upsetting.
Yeah, and I think that might be like why there's some difference between like when you and I talk versus when you speak to like some other coaches. Maybe is like, I was a sex worker for over a decade, so there's certain patterns that you just get used to, or you're just like, I know what that is. I know what you're doing, right? Like the person close to me who's the therapist, when they were telling me about this client who was harassing them, I was like, oh yeah, that's like a fucking kink. Like, don't do that with this person,
Yeah.
So people who aren't in that world all the time might not immediately understand what's going on because it's just a lack of exposure, right? Which makes sense. And hopefully most people won't have to learn that lesson, right? Like hopefully that'll happen once or twice, or maybe not at all. And then you can be like, oh, some people are jerks, right? Like it's always my wish that people don't have to learn these things and harden with experience. And everyone's different. And again, like we were saying before, if you are someone who's gotten hardened with experience, it doesn't mean that you're particularly weak or not smart or anything. Like this behavior is non-discriminatory. It might just be because you were available at 9 p.m. It might be because you're who they saw when they were like stumbling out of the bar drunk. You know what I mean? It's like really, it doesn't matter what work you've done, whatever. Like it can literally happen to anyone, and it cannot happen to anybody.
Yeah.
Also.
Exactly. I think that is so important. There is no guilt and no shame in being in learning, in having to learn, in having the experience, because it just means that we are learning the hard way, and that is also okay. And lastly, how that happens so much more, I don't know if so much more, but at least in the conversations I have had, to women of color. How women of color sometimes come more with this wound of being shamed for our sexuality. I am right now supporting a person that has gone through that, just because some pictures were, she's not even a coach, but some pictures were leaked from her phone, and that took to a whole downward spiral of shame and humiliation and abuse. And I really think that it's so important to mention how the limit of morality, because that's the very first thing that people use, right? Like, oh, if you were more modest, if you kept your sexuality for yourself, if you whatever bullshit they say, that line is so different from one place to another, from one culture to another, and one state to another, even in one same country, that in reality we cannot put shame on any woman at any time for being attacked or harassed by a man, because it's not about our modesty, it's not about us embracing our sexuality or speaking about our sexuality or just showing up in social media. It's not our fault, and we shouldn't be dealing with that fault.
No, not at all. It's really it has nothing to do with something you manifested, right? It's just like we're putting the blame in the wrong place, and it's really gross. And rather than analyzing, and this is so cliche, right? It's like this is old news, but rather than analyzing, what did you do to make this happen? What did you do to attract this? What did you do to magnetize this kind of behavior? It's like, why are we putting so much emphasis on this? What are we doing that, like, my existence in the world is an invitation for your bad behavior? Like, what are we doing that no is not an acceptable answer? Like, it's why, so yeah, shaming each other is useless. It doesn't resolve the problem. All it is an exercise of people flexing at one another how they would have survived this situation. Right? Like, it's not like nothing's healed by saying like, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. It's just like, oh, well, I'm going to process in front of you with unsolicited advice about how I think I would have handled that, because I need to know that I'm okay if that ever happened to me. It's not fixing the problem.
And thank you so much for using the word manifested, because that is the very first thing that people say that disempowers others. What are you doing to manifest this? Oh, how did you manifest that? What are you thinking? What's your mindset? Well, it's not about us. It's about a freaking system that it's used to keeping us down and pushing us down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a few words, like when we're going through these processes of analysis, I think there's a few words that we need to take away in the initial phases of this analysis to see if our argument still holds up. I think we need to take away the word triggered. We need to take away the word manifest. We need to take away the concept of like intent. And that doesn't mean don't infuse those back into the thought process, but I think we get so hung up on these buzzwords that we're not thinking deeply and critically enough, because we're like, oh, I said the word triggered, like I'm done. I said triggered, that's the argument, Oh, word manifest, like that's the argument, I've arrived. Like, no, can you get through a constructive thought process without using buzzwords to truly understand what might be going on for you? Are there other words you can use to show yourself and others that you have like a full understanding of this, rather than like relying on the crutch of words that are popular right now that might shift, right? Like,
and that people don't understand when they are talking about them, specifically the word trigger. That is something so important, and that everybody's using so freely right now. It's so upsetting. When I think about trigger, I think about the trauma response, that it's out of control, about a whole emotional flashback that it's actually triggered by an action, but or a sense of unsafety. But that comes with a responsible use, but most people don't use it responsible.
No,
but most people just use it to shame people.
Yeah,
just being triggered.
Right. Oh, you upset me. Oh, why are you triggered? Like, I'm not triggered. Like, you pissed me off. It's not. Yeah, we don't have to have a conversation about trauma right now. Like, you just, you drank the rest of my wine. Like, it didn't replace it. I'm not triggered. Like,
Exactly. I was angry. I wanted to set a boundary. I'm not triggered. I just want to set a boundary.
Yeah, we don't have to have like a therapy session over this. Just like
exactly.
Right. Well, and I think also like misusing that term romanticizes and keeps us stuck in victimhood, frankly. And there's nothing wrong with being a victim. If you are a victim, that's okay, right? But if you are not a victim and you are using language and creating circumstances around you that keep you powerless, like, why? Ask yourself why. Or are you using language to rob someone else of the way they're advocating for themselves, right? So if someone is like, I'm upset about this thing, or like, hey, I have a boundary, and you say you're triggered, rather than seeing this person as just a human being who's like just having a boundary or just saying they're upset, you're saying, you're a victim.
Exactly. It's your victim mentality.
It's your victim mentality. And maybe that person isn't a victim and they don't see themselves as a victim at all. And it's kind of like this, like, it creates this dynamic of like, oh, you poor thing, let me save you because you're fragile right now. Like, no.
Or shaming people because they go through something, and then it's your victim mentality that made you go through this, and it has nothing to do with victim mentality. It has to do with people learning how to set up their boundaries, as we all do in our culture, where we are not taught how to set boundaries, specifically as women.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, like that's just forcing other people to be victims because we can't find the language or the emotions to properly deal with our responses, is like, that's another form of, non-consent. And I, more recommended reading. I was just reading a piece by Bell Hooks. It's Feminism, a Transformational Practice, I think is the title of the piece she wrote. But in this, she writes about one of the main points of union that we share collectively is everyone has the ability to dominate and be dominated, right? And this is like something we need to keep in mind, especially in our conversations about like feminism and patriarchy and circles of sisters and everything, is like, and what you're talking about with like women of color, and like disproportionate amounts of harassment that you receive. We need to constantly keep in mind our inclinations to dominate one another within our circles. Yeah. And that comes down to not believing women of color when they say they've been harassed. That comes down to non-consensually convincing someone else they're a victim when they're just trying to set a standard boundary. Like these are all the ways that like we think we're helping, but really like check in. Are you engaging? Are you playing out a social drama of dominance right now?
Yeah, and to bring this conversation to a closure, because we just could keep going for hours, and I love that. We're going to keep going after we end up the podcast.
Yeah.
If you have the time, of course. But it's how, after all, it is just about keeping women in their place. How this, for me, that thing that you said just puts everything in the perfect, ties the dot, puts everything in the perfect context. Harassment is just about keeping women in their place, keeping us afraid of showing up, keeping us hidden, keeping us under their control, under their radar, keeping us quiet. And we play along as women when we shame other women for feeling uncomfortable or for their own harassment, when we shame them for receiving harassment. So I think that it's so important. The very first time that I was sexually harassed, I was 8 years old. It was nothing that I said, it was nothing that I did. It was just harassment for existing in the body of a woman. The very first time my daughter was harassed, it was in her own patio, like she was just playing with her friends, and there was a worker outside just sexualizing her, screaming and yelling things at her, and she's a kid. So it's not about us women doing, manifesting, thinking. It's about men trying to keep on the patriarchal model that serves them the most, and that reminds them that women are to serve, to be small, and to be quiet, and that our bodies and our sexuality and our full life turns around them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I'm so sorry to hear that happened to you and your daughter. And I think that's an excellent point, right? Is like, as children, what would we use the same argument? Are children manifesting this attention? No. So that's a super important point that you bring up. Like, this is like, this weird logic we come up with, like how far can you actually apply it until it's like deeply fucked up, you know?
Exactly. As a sexuality coach, of course I get more, but I shouldn't, because I am not working for them to do that. Like, I shouldn't be saying, of course I get more harassment because I am a sex coach. Dude, I am doing nothing to deserve to be harassed.
No.
Because I speak about sexual empowerment. And even if I took pictures in even more sensuality appealing clothes and poses, it still wouldn't mean that men would be allowed to harass us.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I completely agree. So yeah, I mean, that's like the work we collectively have to do, is like get this idea that, like, you know, a woman's sexuality is automatically an invitation. We've got a conversation about sexuality, like shameless, for a woman to shamelessly discuss sexuality is not an invitation, you know? And you know, and if you're not sure, ask, I guess, if it's appropriate. And if they say no, then it's no, and that's the end. You know?
Exactly.
Like, you know, because sex can be awkward, especially in, like, you know, how many of us have been raised, and you know, cultures we've grown up in. Like, sex can be awkward, and not everyone is smooth. Not everyone knows, like, was this weird? Was this creepy? I thought it was cool. I was flirting. You know, it gets weird. So I guess if you're not sure, ask. And if the answer is no, then, like, the end.
Exactly.
And what you're talking about in your stories is, you know, it was the pushing after you've said, like, this is not what we're here for. And that's when it turns into harassment, not a misguided person looking for help. That's harassment.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. I hope that sharing these stories will support other women to realize that it's wrong, that they don't have to normalize it, and that they can ask for support from other women. And even if it's just to rant, that's useful. Even if it's just to say, oh my God, this happened to me. Oh, it's wrong. Oh, fucker. So whatever, that's useful. That helps you create a healthier view of your space and your purpose and why you exist. That it's not okay to normalize others' visions of you.
Absolutely. You're allowed to get angry. It's healthy. Yeah. And men don't own anger. Like, take that back, be angry, talk to your friends about it, talk to your sisters about it, talk to your peers in the industry. Like, we should be able to hold each other up in this way.
Yes. Thank you so much with that amazing and very powerful reminder. I'm going to leave this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me in this beautiful reminder and conversation about claiming our bodies. And guys, see you soon.
Bye. Thank you.